Good morning to everyone, and hello from the UK. Yeah, so my name's Bryan Roberts. I've been a retail analyst for over 20 years. I've worked for a variety of market research and shopper research companies, working with some of the world's biggest retailers and CPG suppliers. Sadly, in January 2020, I found myself out of work. And then obviously the pandemic happened in March 2020. And so in order to keep myself busy and equally importantly to learn more about the retail industry than I'd learnt in the previous 20 years, I spent a very, very happy year working in a Tesco superstore, which gave me so much insight into the industry, into retail, into shoppers, into suppliers. I'd like to point out that I was never actually employee of the month. This was just a photo I had taken for me by a friend at work. And since leaving Tesco, I've started my own business called Shopfloor Insights. And I'm also part of the Retail Cities network of experts. So you would have heard from Vadim yesterday morning, who's also part of the Retail Cities network too. So it's a great pleasure to be with you this morning. And what I'd like to do is just really talk through with you what's happened over the last year in the UK supermarket sector and how a lot of the retailers have been working before the pandemic, but are also working now as we start to exit the pandemic, in terms of making themselves a bit more secure in terms of facing the future, because as we'll see in a second, a lot of those big challenges the UK retailers have been facing are starting to come back. So I mentioned some of those challenges, and hopefully you can see here on the chart that the top figures are for 2021 for each retailer, and the bottom figures are for 2010. And this is market share data from Kantar. And what you can see is that for the last 10, 11 years, all of the big established supermarkets have found life incredibly difficult. They've been losing share quite consistently year on year, month on month for the last decade. So we can see that for Tesco, for Sainsbury's, for Asda and for Morrison's. And the primary reason for that has been the growth of the German discounters, all of whom have been, Lidl and Aldi have been in the market for many, many years. But it wasn't really until 2008 and the big financial crisis that they really started becoming popular with British shoppers, but also because they'd really started changing their range, adding a lot more brands, adding a lot more assortment to their stores. And also doing things like introducing bakery and so on. But perhaps more importantly, just opening tons and tons of new shops. And this is something we're seeing in lots of European markets. That as they open more stores, they get more shoppers. And also as they improve their range and improve their marketing, they also win more shoppers from those big established retailers. And you can see at the bottom as well, we've got Ocado, the big online specialist in the UK market, which, still a minor player, but certainly had a very, very strong year. But what we can see here is the big four big supermarkets have all struggled massively until 2020. And lots of their smaller competitors, be they discounters or convenience or online retailers, have all been taking market share away from them. And then we got to March 2020, and I've never seen anything like it. So we started seeing signs in lots of the stores around the country. It started in categories like soap, then it moved into toilet paper, then it moved into washing detergent. Then department by department, this was happening every single day, that the entire store was being stripped bare. So this is a Tesco store at around 2:00 in the afternoon. And, it was just category after category. And this is milk, which it's very, very unusual, to put it mildly, to see a milk section in any supermarket in quite this state of devastation. And again, just to reiterate, this was happening every single day. This is bread. Again, just unheard of, unparalleled amounts of demand going through the entire value chain. And I think it's of huge credit to the big retailers and to the big suppliers that they coped with such a huge shock to demand. And I think importantly, what this did is it led to plenty of old traditional shopper behaviours coming back. So we'd seen in the UK market, shoppers were happy to be quite promiscuous. They would shop up to 5 different retailers every month, 5 different banners, if you like, every single month. Some people were doing 3, 4, 5, 6 different shopping trips every week, convenience, discount, superstores, online. There was a huge fragmentation, if you like, from British shoppers. And that's one of the reasons why the big retailers had been struggling for quite such a long time. I think what we saw was people started really reconsolidating those shopping trips. So they were going to bigger stores. They weren't going to discounters quite as much as they used to. They were using online, sometimes for the first time in their kind of shopping careers, if you like. So there was a big reversal of lots of shopping behaviors. And we saw the rebirth, the renaissance of the big weekly shopping trip, or even the big fortnightly shopping trip. We saw for the first time in many years, lots of shoppers walking around the store with very well organized shopping lists. You can see on the left, these are ones I found in trolleys when I was at work in Tesco. On the left-hand side, you've got a meal plan running down that shopping list on the right there. Then you've got the shopping list on the left. On the right-hand side, you've got someone who's actually researched all of the prices and, got a very extensive and very well-prepared printed shopping list. So this really showed the huge reset in shopper philosophy. There weren't 6 shopping trips a week. There was 1 shopping trip a week. And often it was happening in a Tesco, an Asda, a Morrison's or a Sainsbury's, as people wanted to get everything under one roof. And discounters weren't very well placed to provide for that because they had limited ranges. They had smaller, crowded stores. So what we saw was a huge impact on shopper behavior, then a huge impact on the drivers of these big retailers' performance. So Asda, which was until very recently part of the Walmart global empire, is now transitioning to new ownership. But Walmart used to publish the sort of data on basket and on frequency for all of its international businesses. And this was the data up until the end of Q4, the most recent financial year. So you start to see Q2 last year would have been March, April, May, just a huge decline in the number of transactions. So people were coming to the store much less frequently, but when they were there, they were spending a lot more money. So we can see there over nearly an 80% increase in basket size during that first lockdown in the UK. And we can see as time goes on that the impact's becoming less severe, but still, we got the most recent market share data from Kantar last week, and it's showing that transaction numbers are going back up or declining less severely, and transaction sizes are coming back down. We're also seeing that people are shopping less frequently online, and we're seeing the discounters starting to come back. I mentioned online, and I think this was incredibly interesting, is that we went from around 7% to nearly 14% share of FMCG just in the space of 12 months. So that was a huge part of growth for the big supermarkets as they enabled online picking to happen from an increasing number of stores. So we expect to start seeing this go down again, perhaps to around 10%, where it might settle long term, because I think, apart from Ocado, it was only very recently that any of the big supermarkets were making money from online. And once I think shoppers start withdrawing from online and this market share starts going back down, it might become less profitable for most of those big retailers, and they'll be less aggressive in terms of trying to recruit new online shoppers. So what we saw last year in 2020 was some of those big long-term trends halted. So for the first time in living memory, we saw Aldi losing market share. We saw Lidl with flat market share. And just coming back to that theme I mentioned earlier, we saw Ocado really increasing sales very rapidly, that online specialist retailer. But also lots of the other businesses like the Co-op, who are very strong in convenience, for example, they saw flat market share as convenience retail kind of slowed down slightly as people preferred to go to the big retailers at the top. So although they weren't growing market share necessarily, the Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda's, Morrison's were at least holding market share, which hasn't happened for many years. So what are the retailers trying to do to both address the pre-COVID trends that we were seeing, but also come out of COVID as stronger businesses? And one big trend, I think, which isn't going away anytime soon, is that of right sizing. So we've seen anyone involved in hypermarkets or bigger superstores realizing that this isn't how shoppers before the pandemic really wanted to shop, and it's unlikely how this is how shoppers would like to shop after the pandemic as well. Big stores aren't a great solution anymore. People don't want to spend, a long time traveling to the stores. They don't want to spend, 40 minutes going around a 10,000 square meter store. They just want to go around and do smaller stores. So we're seeing that these big stores are no longer fit for purpose. So Asda, for example, here is giving away big chunks of its store to other retailers like Decathlon. Tesco is using big chunks of its larger stores for e-commerce picking, for example. So this right-sizing theme, I think, is going to be quite relevant for the future, because these retailers are realizing that the hypermarkets really have had their day, and it's going to be all about smaller, better stores to some extent. And as part of this process, we're seeing a lot more partnering. And this isn't just with non-food retailers. It can be with restaurants. It can be with third-party food counter providers. So really the whole story around at the moment is for Tesco, for Asda, for Sainsbury's in particular, is how do we make these bigger stores smaller? How can we give space to people who are going to do a better job than we can in some of these non-food categories? So this is a great example from Asda, where they've partnered with a toy retailer called The Entertainer. And what this does is it frees up space. It releases unproductive space for Asda. It gives a much better destination for shoppers. This will drive footfall. And also it enables Asda to release some headcount, some personnel costs as well. So this type of solution is becoming a lot more popular in the UK superstore and hypermarket sector, as retailers realise they need to get rid of some of this unproductive space and provide shoppers with more reasons to visit these big stores. And part of this process is battle picking, and I think this is something that lots of retailers who have any sort of involvement in general merchandise are realising at the moment. Is you cannot be good at everything. You cannot be adequate at everything. You can't be average at 20 different non-food categories. So what we're seeing is lots of the retailers thinking, well, let's pick 4 or 5 different categories that we believe we can be good at. So this is an example from Sainsbury's, and some of their stores they're transforming at the moment. They've picked toys because they own Argos, which is a big general merchandise retailer and has great relationships with toy suppliers. And also they're picking health and beauty. They believe they can be credible. They can provide a credible destination in health and beauty. So they're not selling necessarily in all of their stores sports and furniture, electricals. What we're seeing is the big retailers picking these battles. Often it's health and beauty, it's baby, it's fashion, it's cook and dine in terms of household products. So they're selling much fewer categories, and where they think that someone else can do a better job, as we saw with Asda and The Entertainer, they're inviting those specialists into their stores to do a better job for them. And wholesaling is something I really didn't think I'd be talking much about in the UK supermarket sector. But we've seen Morrison's, the number 4 player, doing a very good job at wholesaling into the convenience channel. It also wholesales to Amazon to help Amazon with its fresh service. And Tesco has become a successful wholesaler with its acquisition of Booker, a big wholesale company, but also through the franchising of its one-stop convenience chain. And this example here is from Sainsbury's. It's quite a recent initiative. They're partnered with an independent retail group called Simply Fresh. So really, this is a great solution. It's enabling Sainsbury's to increase volumes, increase buying, increase its logistical volumes, and getting, indirectly higher market share. And for Simply Fresh and for Simply Fresh's shoppers, it's giving them a great, credible brand. It's giving them an enhanced value perception as well. So, as I mentioned, this has kind of been a surprise of the last 2 years in terms of the big supermarkets. Virtually all of them now, with the exception of Asda, are discovering wholesaling and franchising as an opportunity, which, to be honest, we weren't really expecting in the UK, given it seems to be slightly going in reverse in terms of the levels of concentration we've seen in the British supermarket sector. And optimizing, I've already mentioned headcount and personnel and labour costs, but unfortunately, in order to try and compete with the discounters and try and keep prices competitive, virtually all of the big supermarkets have slashed employee numbers in head office, in regional roles, in managerial roles within store, and just in general. So they're always looking for ways to make themselves more efficient. And we've seen some innovations, as you can see on the left, from Morrison's, in terms of using gravity-fed shelving so that people don't have to spend their time facing the shelving up. We've seen a lot more deployment or experimentation with electronic shelf labeling as well. So just two examples of ways that British retailers are really trying very, very hard to make themselves more efficient, so they can keep a lid on prices whilst hopefully as well maintaining some degree of profitability. And feeding, I think this has been really, really interesting. And obviously this has been super important during the pandemic with restaurants and bars closed. But this was happening pre-COVID anyway. All of the big retailers realizing that there's an opportunity to do a better job at food for now or food for later. So on the one example here on the left-hand side, Asda, you've got a very familiar concept here of the sushi bar. And lots of the big supermarkets are inviting in these third parties. So Sushi Daily is a good example, but lots and lots of different food service and catering and restaurant brands. So for example, Sainsbury's this week is partnering with Carluccio's to open in-store restaurants. So there's lots of activity in this space. Again, it frees up dead space, it releases personnel costs, and it provides those reasons to visit for British shoppers. This is something that discounters can't do. And Morrison's there, you can see on the right-hand side, they've got a concept called Market Street that they're rolling out to lots and lots of different stores. And this is all lots of different food counters and coffee bars and all this type of stuff. Again, it's providing reasons to visit, and it's enabling them to gain a greater share of the broader market of food and drink beyond retail. So lots of the big retailers are all thinking about not just about competing with each other, but about competing with restaurants and providing more calories for the British consumers. And this is something, again, which is becoming a lot more prevalent. There's quite a few new Marks and Spencer stores that are doing this on the left-hand side with these refill counters for different categories. And they're really heavily expanding this concept into lots of new stores. On the right-hand side there, you've got just one example from Sainsbury's partnering with an ecological laundry brand. But even the big suppliers like Unilever have been experimenting with retailers like Asda to introduce these concepts into big stores. And they seem to be quite popular with shoppers, and it's very much the direction of travel. Supermarkets have to do the right thing. They have to minimize their impact on the environment, and they have to help shoppers minimize their impact on the environment too. So these types of solutions, I think, are going to be a lot more commonplace as we head out of the pandemic. And again, reducing as well as refilling. This Waitrose said this week they're going to heavily expand this concept called Unpacked. So it's about reducing packaging. It's about increasing, as we saw with Marks and Spencer's, the variety of different products that shoppers can buy loose. It's about getting rid of single-use plastic in produce and lots of other different categories as well. So this is a big, big theme. I think, regardless of your opinion, single-use plastic is seen as the public enemy number one, as shoppers try and reduce their environmental footprint. So lots and lots more retailers and also suppliers are making strides. We saw a big initiative launched this week from people like Mondelez, PepsiCo and Mars to reduce single-use plastic and lots of other different types of packaging as well. So this is a big theme, and I'd expect this to become important in your market as well. And rechanneling, we've mentioned online going through the roof during the pandemic, but this is just part of a longer process about retooling stores to be better equipped to cope with changing shopper expectations around online. So not just around grocery online, but we see there in the middle some Asda food collection lockers, but also in terms of how can retailers better cater for general merchandise e-commerce. So on the left-hand side, you've got Asda with these big parcel towers in its stores. On the right-hand side, you've got Sainsbury's enabling shoppers to order in store from its Argos sister company. So really reimagining the whole store and how the stores can better plug into different e-commerce functions, delivery, returning, as well as collection. This is one I really like as well. This is happening in a lot more stores now. Hopefully you would have heard of InFarm. They're very present in markets like Germany and France, but also British supermarkets like Whole Foods and Marks and Spencer's are installing lots more of these vertical farm cabinets in their stores as well. So I think we could argue all day about the economics of these and the impact on the top line. But I think what it does prove is that shopper expectations are changing. And this is a great way of changing shopper perceptions about your attitude to the environment and to fresh and to local, for example. There's also a big divergence at the moment. I'm aware that I need to speed up, but we see, as I mentioned, we're seeing some retailers. So, this is on the left-hand side is a typical scene from food counters from some of the big retailers like Tesco and Sainsbury's, simply shut and dead space. But I think what we're seeing from other retailers like M&S is really investing heavily in their service counters. So my concern for some of the big retailers is they're losing some of the differentiation, although they're becoming more efficient and reducing costs. Whereas for Marks and Spencer's, they're creating genuine destinations. For me, this is a worry for some of the big supermarkets, is they're losing some of that appeal. Inspiration, I think, is important. On the right-hand side, you've got Tesco helping shoppers make smarter choices. So swapping items, swapping bad items for better items in terms of health. And also we're seeing this from Sainsbury's on the left-hand side with helping everyone eat better. This is something they launched last Thursday, and it's helping shoppers make smarter choices when it comes to their health and wellness, but also making smarter choices when it comes to the environmental impact of the products that they choose to buy. And finally, lubricating. And I think this is very, very important, is although shopping isn't a huge ordeal, the impact of Amazon's entry on the right-hand side there, Amazon now has 4 Amazon Fresh stores in London. I think that's really raised the bar in terms of shopper expectations. They don't want to waste time at checkouts anymore. So there we've got an example from Tesco on the left in terms of cashless stores, but all of the retailers, I think, are very mindful of the fact that Amazon has raised the bar in terms of shopper expectations about the checkout process, about convenience. So I think we're going to see a lot more activity from Tesco, from Sainsbury's, from all of the other big retailers in terms of how can they make the shopping experience, how can they give it less friction? How can they lubricate that shopper journey, with checkout obviously being a particular pain point? So apologies for the very quick postcard from the UK, but hopefully I've brought together some of those challenges that people were facing, some of the big changes that happened over the last 12 months during the pandemic, and also how some of the retailers are trying to equip themselves to be stronger in the expectation that lots of old behaviours will come back, that big stores will be less popular, discounters more popular, and online will kind of plateau. So hopefully you found that an interesting start to the day. I made it deliberately light on lots of data and charts, and just have some nice pretty photos. So if there's any questions, do let me know. There are different ways of getting in touch with me. And again, thank you so much for having me with you this morning. It's been a great privilege. And I hope the rest of the day goes well for all of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Bryan, for this amazing presentation. It was really inspiring. So I have one question, if you don't mind. Well, you said multiple times during this presentation that shopping behavior changed, that expectations changed because of the online, Amazon, everything, and the way people shop. In Serbia also research showed us that people during COVID went only 1 time per week to buy something because they didn't want to go to store multiple times with masks and everything. But you mentioned that things are going back, to normal with online and everything. So what do you think of all these trends you mentioned? What is the one we need to think about when everything starts to go back to normal, when we don't need to wear masks, and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the initiatives that the big retailers were launching before COVID was about, how do we encourage shoppers to spend more time in store? What other features can we put inside the store to increase dwell time, which will then hopefully increase spend? And obviously that was totally killed off by COVID. We wanted shoppers to come in and get out as quickly as possible. And shoppers also wanted that. They wanted to be in store for much less time. So I think that trend might be reversed. We might start seeing retailers again trying to encourage people to spend more time in store, eating and browsing and experiencing different parts of the store. So that might come back. And I think the interesting one is the trend towards convenience. That was really, and particularly urban convenience. So Tesco, Sainsbury's, Co-op, Waitrose have spent a lot of money opening stores near offices in city centres, and that was a horrible experience for them during COVID, because people are working at home 5 days a week. The expectation is that in the UK, people will go back to offices 3 or 4 days a week. So that means, I think, that urban stores will become again more important, but still a lot of spend, or a higher share of spend, will still continue to be in the suburban or the residential areas. So really, that's been the big change for me. Is before COVID, the mentality from big retailers was big shops are bad and small shops are good. I think that's been slightly recalibrated in terms of, small shops are going to be increasingly important again, but the priorities might be shifted in terms of how can we make bigger shops better rather than just trying to make those bigger shops smaller. So a lot remains to be seen about what normality will look like, particularly around working and traveling patterns. But I think the big supermarkets are a bit more optimistic than they would have been this time 18 months ago, which for them is obviously a slight consolation from the horrible year that we've all been through.
Thank you, Bryan, so much. Have a great day.